Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle. We have some postseason talk, some new hiring talk, and who knows? Maybe we'll talk about the NCAA too. They're always fun to talk about. We have the usual crew with us today: Eric McKinney, Mark Holkin, and Greg Katz for the second week in a row. We didn't run them off this time like we did before, and we're ready to get going, guys. Let's start with this. It took a while for Lincoln Riley to hire a linebackers coach, but he hired one, and it's one that unusual for assistant coaches, one that just about everybody who follows USC football would have heard about. So they hired Rob Ryan, one of the famous Ryan family of defensive coaches, Buddy, Rex, and Rob. They hired the youngest one with the best hair. Guys, let's get some thoughts on this hire. I'll say this before I let you guys have it. I've noticed that if you look around at what other teams are saying, it's sort of split. There are people who are talking about it being a good hire, and then there are people, not just the Oregon dude who always has bad things to say about USC. But I saw something from a Nebraska writer today talking about how Nebraska is more likely to beat USC next year because USC hired Rob Ryan as a linebackers coach. I'm not sure I followed the logic, but that's the claim that was made. So what do you think, Eric McKinney? Let's start with you. Rob Ryan, good hire, bad hire?
I think it's an impressive hire. I mean, it's always one of those. Is it going to end up good or bad? I don't know at this point, but what I do know is that it's an impressive hire, and it's another one in a long string of impressive hires on that side of the ball, especially. This was it wasn't that long ago that we were wondering, can Lincoln Riley bring in anybody on that side? Does anybody want to show up and coach defense opposite Lincoln Riley, who, again, the talking points at that time were he spends no time on defense, they don't hit, there's not a culture there on defense, nobody wants to coach on that side for him. All they've done since that point is hit big time hires, I think, on the defensive side. And that sort of coupled with, at this point, extending Danton Lynn and bringing him back, I, I don't see how you say, boy, that was a real miss. I don't know what they were thinking. College is moving towards an NFL structure in every sense of it. And so, can you recruit all that stuff is sort of so secondary to me behind, can you develop guys, can you build culture, and are you focused, and are you visible enough on that side of the ball to get guys to come play for you and then play well? And I think this is higher. I mean, you go back and look where he's been, who he's coached, his name, the fact that you can throw now every single one of these guys NFL, 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 NFL at players that you want to come play at USC. I think that's huge. Matt Entz, we saw in one year, was, I think, phenomenal with the linebackers. And a lot of it came from what he could bring as a former head coach. They believed in it. He believed in that side of the ball. Um, Spent like a lot of time individually on small things with individual guys at that linebacker spot. And I think Rob Ryan checks a lot of those boxes, plus gives you the NFL connections on top of that. So I'm at the point where Danton Lynn, just in one year, has done enough for me to go, oh, that's his guy. Great. Sounds great. He's worked with him before. You're not worried like we were last offseason about how are all these guys going to work together? Maybe there's a tiny bit of overlap, but not a lot. There's a lot here. And I think he hits the ground running, and the linebackers are excited to play for him.
So, Greg Katz,
Yes, yes, my lead.
you tell me when it comes to position coaches, what do you really want in a position coach, and does Rob Ryan offer those things to USC?
Well, if you're going to be a linebacker coach, you got to bring a lot of violence. You got to bring a lot of intimidation. You've got to say, if one of our guys hits you, you're going to know about it. Okay. As far as his experience, he's got a ton of experience. But makes you ask the question, how long will he be at USC? Now, a lot of people are going to say, let's not worry how long he's going to be there. Let's just see what he does this coming season. But you know what? SC is not in a position in the long term to have coaches coming and going because of recruiting. Now, obviously, the NFL background by Ryan will appeal to a lot of players. When he says this is what you got to do, they're probably going to do it. And I think the way he looks with the long hair and I watched some video on him coaching. Uh, he appears to be a good coach. He wouldn't have been in the NFL that long, other than what that he's Ryan. But I think in the end, it's what can he do with this group? What does he see? But more importantly, who can he recruit? If somebody says, "Are you going back to the NFL? You haven't coached in college since 1990, I believe it is." So, it's exciting because he knows what he's doing. But it's also a question. He's been in a lot of NFL teams. It's not like he's been, 14 years with the Dallas Cowboys or something like that. So I'm intrigued about it. I think it'll be fun to watch, and nothing but the best for him.
Well, speaking of guys who know what they're doing, Mark Culkin, weigh in on Rob Ryan. Is this a right hire? Is it the right kind of hire? Is this the sort of guy we should be adding to the staff right now?
Yes, yes, yes. Look, to Greg's point, the last time Coach Rob Ryan coached in college was 1999. It was 25 years ago. But I think everybody's concerned. We're talking about recruiting. Rob Ryan is used to coaching professionals. That's what he's been doing for the last 25 years of his 34-year coaching career. Well, guess what? He's coming back to college where all these young men think they are semi-professionals now. So that gap between what used to be a college player and an NFL player, it's like this now. So if the player says, well, I need to see how much money I can make, yada, 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 Rob can say, look, we can talk about that, but this is what you're worth. What I like about Coach Ryan, other than the fact that he's fat and he's got the hair and he just looks the part, he talks the right game as well. He has great communication skills. James Craig, offensive line coach with the Raiders. I believe he coached at USC in the past. He said one of Coach Ryan's best attributes is his ability to communicate, to talk X's and O's. So that's what you want from your position coach. And if he's able to do that at USC, he still has that name recognition, that cachet. Yeah, coming from the House of Ryans, it matters. I, Greg talked about violence. I hope it never happens. I don't want to see Rob Ryan punching USC's offensive coordinator or attempting to punch the offensive coordinator.
Well, I mean, depends. Are we going to run the ball or not?
Well, as long as things are going the right way, I don't think that'll happen. But again, yeah, Rob is, I think, going to be a good addition to the staff. The one negative, and maybe this is why it took so long, his brother Rex is, up for other NFL gigs. Will he pull a Cliff Kingsbury and leave USC before he has a chance to practice? I could see that happening. I don't see it happening this year. They wouldn't have taken this long to name Rob Ryan as the linebacker coach if they didn't get some kind of assurance from him. I would hope. I mean, again, that would be terrible optics to wait over a month and then, spring camp's about to open and guess what? You're looking for another linebacker coach. So overall, I think it's great. When it comes to recruiting, Eric mentioned it, just be on campus when the players you want are visiting, whether it's unofficially or officially. Close the door, explain to them why you're the right guy to develop this recruit and take them to the next level. Good hire. Again, I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is not a guy who's learning his craft, right? I mean, this is somebody who you can't get more experience in a position coach than you get from a guy who's been a defensive coordinator at something like 4 different NFL teams, right? I mean, this is a guy who's been coaching for a very long time and knows a lot. He knows Lynn's defense. They've worked together. Rob Ryan probably knows just about everybody's defense at this point. He's been around so many different NFL franchises, been coaching so long, but he knows what Lynn wants to accomplish. He's clearly knowledgeable, and he clearly has credibility. We've seen how important that is with Coach Henderson. His ability to talk about what he did in the NFL was meaningful to recruits. The guys that USC wants to recruit are guys who think they have a chance to play in the NFL, and so to be able to tell them, I know what it takes. I've coached with Bill Belichick, and I've coached with my dad, and I've coached with all these other, and I've coached all pros and Hall of Famers, and that gives him a certain amount of cachet. He's a guy who has credibility. I think players will listen to, and while there's been a youth movement in both the NFL and college in terms of coaches, right? They're hiring younger and younger. He doesn't fit that mold, which is probably why he's available. But he seems to be a guy who has quite a bit of energy and enthusiasm still. So I don't think they're going to suffer from that. Is he somebody who's going to connect with college players? I don't know. I take it. I think he will for two reasons. One, because I've seen his personality. I've seen the way he coaches, and Lynn wanted him. So I suspect he will. But I guess that's still a question mark. He's been dealing with older professionals for some time now. Is he a guy who's going to be okay with what the college game has become, or is he going to get frustrated and decide he wants to get out? That's a good question. That question equally applies to Coach Lynn and Coach Henderson and just about everybody else on the staff, right? Because it's such a crazy world. But it seems to me that it's a good hire. It's a good hire because he's a guy who is going to be a very good position coach for you, I suspect. And he's also going to be a great sounding board for Lynn. There's nothing that this guy hasn't seen, and there's nothing he hasn't talked about. And his connections are unbelievably deep. And so I think it's a good hire. I'm excited about it. All right, the college football season's over, but the NFL season's going strong. Women's college basketball, NBA, all kinds of things you might want tickets for. If you want tickets, and I know you do, Game Time app. That's your solution. The Game Time app, you download it. If this is your first time purchasing, put in on3, ON3, get $20 off. Good service. I've used it. Good prices, good tickets, easy in and out. I talked just a second ago about the changes in NCAA. We might as well go there. Let's talk about the latest non-application of the NCAA rules, I guess you'd describe it. The NCAA after all this complaining about the transfer portals, the NCAA seems to have decided that the transfer portal doesn't exist, which doesn't mean that you can't leave. It means that you can always leave at any time, as long as the other university will accept you and enroll you, which if you're talking about a guy who's 6'4" and runs a 4.4, they always will. So what in the world do we make of this? First of all, can it get any crazier than it's gotten? I would have said no 2 weeks ago, but now it appears that it has. I don't know what's next. What do you think, guys? Should we just be, instead of recruiting on an annual basis, our roster, maybe USC should be recruiting on a weekly basis? We're facing somebody that has a really good pass rusher. Maybe we need to pull a left tackle out of the portal in week 8 and throw him out there. I mean, the NCAA doesn't care. Mark, you go first. What do you have to say about this?
So the NCAA still has this one little trump card up their sleeve. We've got the academic calendar, Chris. We got to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, they better fix this loophole yesterday, because right now the transfer portal is already an option to these players. NIL is the driving force behind it. And we now have head coaches calling out other programs for tampering. This needs to you need to have a closed door session right now. They've got to fix this. You cannot allow this to happen. Otherwise, I don't know how college football exists. It's not sustainable, because you will have rogue programs that will do anything to win.
We've always had rogue programs. They just have more tools in their toolbox now.
We'll have ones that will blatantly say, watch me do this in your face, like in Oregon, that's willing to do stuff like this. So yeah, there's no positives to this well, all you got to do is find a school that'll enroll you. No, there's nothing good about this. Nothing.
I got a positive I'll share in a second, but you're right. It's wild. Um, Greg, what do you think about this rule? What do you think about just letting guys transfer whenever they want, as many times as they want, and we're just going to pretend that that makes sense for football teams? What do you think?
I think the whole thing is a joke. I think when they do the things they've been doing, it pushes coaches to be in agreement that they need their own governing situation. I know that Nick Saban talked about what he thought that they should do, and I agreed with him. There's kind of it's a hypocrisy, really. Somebody can change schools academically and go from one school to the other, even if they're the same major. Nothing happens. It's no big deal. But I think the bigger issue is once you started paying the players, everything gets changed. Everything, like anything else that gets created, it's those negative points that you have to deal with. You have to believe that they're there. Players are being told, I know you're getting this amount of money at your college, but we can double that at our college. And it's become the NFL in a way that that's not really college sports should be about. I totally think this idea of players selling themselves as they're a product, and schools make a lot of money off of them. Well, schools are also paying for education. Now I realize a lot of players sit there and go, education. I'm trying to get those 3 years and out I go to the NFL. But they need some severe discipline, severe structure. They may have to go back to rules that they didn't like initially and change them. This idea of players, coming out of high school in their spring year of their senior season, and all of a sudden they go to spring practice and they don't like it there. So now they're going to go back and figure out another place to play before they even step on foot on a campus where they're really able to play in a game. I think it's really, really bad. Like you said, there are coaches that are going to do anything to do it. I don't see Oregon as the bad guy in the sense that what they're doing. You know what? All these schools have been doing it. They've all been doing it. Some are just better at covering it up. I was aware of Notre Dame doing some stuff when I was younger.
Hey, spill the beans. I want to hear it.
Well, that's why you're not going to hear it, because you like that type of dirty, triumphant type of stuff.
What this is about, Greg.
Nice try. But no, the point is that they're going to have to institute something. I mean, let's take a look at the quarterback that left, USC for Boise State, right? Now, what is he doing? He's changing from Boise State to another school. He hasn't played one down of, quote, varsity football in a game, and he's already working on his third school. There's something wrong about that, and it sends out a bad message to other players going, well, he did it. If it doesn't work out here, I'll just do the same thing. And in the end, college coaches are going to say, I don't want to be in that situation. I'd rather try to get in the NFL or whatever. And they're going to lose the people that really have the biggest bond with these players. And I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm afraid that right now it is happening.
Eric, my assumption has been that this came about because you continually wrote to the NCAA commissioner telling him we just need to dispense with these portal rules. One, is that what happened? And two, why'd you do that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is what happened. So here's where I am. I do think what you didn't ask me was I do think there are potentially some answers for this. And I think one of them, if you're gonna have sort of unrestricted free agency, a lot of people kind of look to the Premier League when we talk about relegation, right? Up and down. If you're if you do this well this season, now you're part of this group of 40 schools or whatever it is that can play for the national championship. If you're not, then you drop down. there's another thing they do with the transfer fee, right? If you sign a kid, if Oregon signs a kid from USC, money changes hands from Oregon to USC, right? If you sign a kid out of the transfer portal, you're gonna have to pay for that kid out of the portal and also pay the school that he's coming from. Then it's okay, how much do you want to tamper? How much do you want to go after that kid? And I think the other thing that is coming is when these roster limits get put in place, then you can't, stockpile and say, well, we'll give you NIL and you can just stay, a non-scholarship player like we've seen with basketball programs, right? We've got 16 guys technically getting scholarship money, but we only have to label, 13 of them as scholarship guys. But I think with that, you need to have coaches lock down their rosters earlier, I think. And I know if that changes the spring portal or whatever it is and coaching moves and all of that stuff. But if you lock in your 105 earlier in the year, now if you can't add guys, you can't lose guys, all of that sort of stuff becomes different than what we're seeing now, where yeah, if the NCAA is saying, quote, NCAA rules do not prevent a student athlete from unenrolling from an institution, enrolling at a new institution, and competing immediately, which is the quote from the NCAA statement. As long as you're getting inside of the academic calendar in the fall, right? Where is that fall camp? You can go from one to the other and be okay. I mean, that's going to open up some crazy stuff. So again, I think that's it. Locking in rosters. Here's our roster. Kids cannot leave, coaches cannot add at a certain point. And again, everything we're getting into is going to get crushed by any lawsuit that challenges that based on the structure that you have right now. So really, no, there's nothing, there's nothing anybody can do about any of this because players can do whatever they want. And what we've seen over and over and over the last couple years is that any lawsuit that gets thrown out against the NCAA wins.
Yeah. All right, I have 3 points. One is Greg brought up the NFL. It's not like the NFL. The NFL is actually run with rules that make sense, right? You can sign a guy for a 3-year deal, and if he doesn't want to play all 3 years, he can sit out and he can't play anywhere else. What you have in college football is a league with no rules. I do think there are rules that you could enforce to solve this particular problem. The NCAA is going to have an impossible time stopping any players from getting paid. That's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. But the reason is because those rules were deemed anti-competitive. There was no alternative to the NCAA for players, no real alternative. And the only justification was that we wanted to keep all the money, which strikes me as quite literally an anti-competitive, price-fixing, collusive sort of deal. But if the conferences wanted to pass their own rules saying guys who transfer in after X date will not be eligible to play in any of the schools in this conference this year, I think they could get away with it. One, there's more than one conference. And so there are alternatives. I don't know that the Big Ten and the SEC are the powerhouses, but there are 4 major conferences and a bunch of others. So I think you could do it, and there's a better justification for that, right? The justification is not just we want to keep all the money. The justification is that it ruins the competitiveness of the game when guys come and go nonstop, even during the season. So I think the conferences could get away with that if they wanted to. But here's the last point I want to make, and actually this is the most important one from my perspective. I think this is good. And I think it's good because it's going to be very difficult to get new rules put in place. It's going to be difficult because the NCAA has been neutered. There is no replacement for them. And that means the only options are really congressional action, right? Pass a federal law, or the players become employees and you have collective bargaining. Those are the only 2 ways you're going to get rules in place right now. Both of those are difficult and come with all kinds of drawbacks. It's only going to happen if things continue to get worse. As long as the current system seems workable to a large number of people, neither one of those avenues will be addressed. When it's completely and utterly unworkable disaster, that makes it more likely we'll actually have rules put in place. I think that's what it takes. I don't think if college football limped along and it wasn't great, but I don't know, I guess things are going okay, then I don't think Congress acts. And it's going to take congressional action to get around the antitrust rules. That's the reality. So I think the more the NCAA can continue to embarrass themselves and make clear that they no longer are in a position to do anything useful, and that the second most popular spectator sport in America is fundamentally broken, the more likely it is we'll get action. So I welcome this ridiculous rule.
So that was the positive that you're holding out on?
That's it.
Now here's my question, because
Darkest before the dawn, my friend.
Do you mean, clarify your stance on the conference can outlaw a player? Because I immediately have an objection to it. I just want to make sure I understood your point, though.
Yeah, no. The problem the NCAA has in regulating compensation and other benefits to employees is that the courts have found that it's collusive. It's an antitrust violation. The NCAA has no competition, and the whole point of controlling compensation is to make it where the people who control the NCAA get to keep all the money. So they don't have a good justification either. What I'm suggesting, though, is that the individual conferences could set eligibility rules that would probably be upheld in court. That would make sense. Now, to the extent they all get together and set the same rule, you're going to have the same collusion problem, but you'd still have a better justification. But if the Big Ten just said, look, okay, the NCAA says you can transfer in whenever you want, and you can. But if you join Ohio State in week 4 of the college football season, you are not playing this year. You're not playing until next year. They could do that and get away with it, I'm quite sure.
Okay. All right. I thought you were going somewhere a little different with that. If let's say somebody transferred before the beginning of the season, and the conference says, no, you can't play in this conference this season because you waited until the 11 o'clock hour, 1 week before the season starts. How does that, if you can't play in the conference, but you can play in games against other conferences? I mean, the
conference can set eligibility rules for its own members, right? And so the Big Ten could say, if you haven't transferred in by X date, then you're not eligible that season. And I think a rule like that probably would get upheld. I mean, obviously it hasn't been tested yet, but I think it would. But in any event, the reality is that in order to have some sort of governing body that actually sets rules, somebody's going to have to take action. I think that somebody's probably going to have to be Congress. I hate relying on the United States Congress to do anything, right? That's crazy talk. But we're now to that point. And the more the NCAA screws everything up, the more likely it is that Congress may actually do something.
Well, I think the first Band-Aid they're looking at is what once the schools put everybody on employee contracts, paying them their 85% of the pie that they're getting, doesn't that kind of nip this in the bud?
Yeah, the schools don't want these kids to be their employees, but yes, if you had collective bargaining can get around the antitrust rules also. That's how the NFL and the NBA do it.
So
not baseball, because baseball has an antitrust exception.
So the schools don't want to make them employees, but
they don't.
But they do want to pay them each football player $100,000 per year.
No, the schools don't want to pay anybody anything. I mean, nobody wants to pay anybody anything.
They've agreed to revenue sharing, though. We've already crossed that bridge.
Yeah, but there are other consequences that come with having somebody as an employee rather than an independent contractor. There are lots of businesses who don't want to make people employees for all kinds of reasons. I don't know
how you make them an independent contractor and then pay for their health insurance. You're all in or you're all out. You can't have it half and half.
Well, you can look around. I mean, that's where we are. I mean, that is what we are. I'm with you. Long term, I think this gets fixed. I don't know how long it takes, and I don't know whether we'll like what we get at the end of this. Because if we're going to have to rely on the United States Congress to do something, then whoever's in charge there. I don't trust that they'll do anything that makes sense, but it might make more sense in our current predicament. I don't know. But it's a weird thing. Okay, speaking of weird things, our long national nightmare is finally over, in the words of Jerry Ford. The Notre Dame Ohio State championship game is behind us. What do we make of the championship game? It's not a huge surprise who won. Ohio State was a clear favorite, and rightly so. But what do we make of it? Eric McKinney, did you watch it? Did you have something next to you just in case you felt sick that you could deal with it appropriately? What'd you do?
Yeah, I watched a good chunk of it. It was nice that Ohio State kind of ran out to that lead, and you could watch it pretty well knowing that Notre Dame wasn't going to win the national championship this year. You know what to make of it is sort of what we talked about. You need offensive playmakers, and I still think you need to be really good defensively. And I know the defensive thing is weird in a game that was 34-23, and we saw throughout the playoffs that there were some pretty big scores put up, but you also saw teams that won could affect the quarterback, and I mean really affect the quarterback. This is not we heard Dan Lynn and Lincoln Riley trying to stay upbeat when it was very clear early in the year, halfway through the year, boy, these guys cannot get to the quarterback. And it's, oh no, we're doing other things, we're affecting the quarterback. No. These playoff teams can affect the quarterback. And so I think that for me was a big takeaway is that defensive front in the front four in terms of a four-man rush getting to the quarterback is huge. Linebacker tackling is huge. And then the other thing that stood out is the rushing numbers by the quarterbacks. And this was something that we saw pretty consistently. Riley Leonard has a game high 17 carries. Will Howard has 16 carries. And they weren't all going for 15, 16 yards. There weren't huge, 50-yard runs for those guys. But quarterback run, quarterback power especially was a big part in a game like that of keeping chains moving, offenses on the field, and that sort of thing. And that's big. That's big right now to have quarterbacks where you're comfortable doing that. And in games like this, against defenses like this, you need that extra guy on offense that is a quarterback who can pick up yards on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if Lincoln Riley was watching that. We were screaming for quarterback runs all year and didn't get it. All right, guys, who else wants to weigh in on this? I mean, it's hard to imagine, other than Oregon being in that championship game, it's hard to imagine a championship game that's more disgusting than Notre Dame Ohio State. But we had it. It happened. We watched it. Greg, what did we learn from it?
Well, what I took out of it was, what does SC have to do to be able to be in that situation? And I think it's nothing revolutionary to say, look, we talk about they have a great defense. What made it a great defense? Great players. These teams have NFL players up front. You have to sit there and ask yourself, is it really about recruiting? And I would say, yes, it's really about recruiting because that's the foundation of it all. Recruiting kids out of high school, this idea of the portal, I'm pretty much on record saying I think it's a good fix in some areas, but that isn't going to win. Ohio State's going to win because they recruit high school players and they're good at it. Okay. Notre Dame, the same way. Penn State, the same way. And in the end, if you don't have the players, it's not the X's and O's because everybody could line up with the same X's and O's. So my feeling was that in watching that championship game, I enjoyed it as a former coach. I enjoyed it because Notre Dame didn't quit. I enjoyed it because Ohio State could have rolled over and didn't. And so in the end, the right team won the national championship. But what did the other teams who are watching this learn? did they learn that you could be a team like Notre Dame, which was limited in offense for the most part. What can they do? What can they do? You got to get better players. It's just that simple. It's like the NFL draft. You know what? You got to know who you're drafting and do a good job at it. And you got to know in college who are the high school guys that you can get that will do what you want them to do. And we'll find out how that applies to a national championship run. I will say right now, I don't see USC in the mix to be a national championship contender. I hope they are, but let's face it, you look at the final AP rankings, 3 of them I think were in the top 5 out of the Big Ten, and there were some others in the Big Ten. And there's only so many teams that are going to make the playoffs. And so they're right there, SC's got to, if they're not going to win the Big Ten, they got to be one of those other 2 or 3 top teams. Because if they aren't, they're going to a bowl game. But let's face it, how many are going to stand up and say, are we going to the Gator Bowl? So that's how I view it.
Mark, Greg is anti-Gator Bowl. Are you? What do you make of that championship game?
Never been to the Gator Bowl. That'd be a bucket list game. Do they still play the Gator Bowl?
How can it be a bucket list? You don't even know if it exists.
Well, they change bowls. The names change annually. So
Wow.
Greg is right. Recruiting matters. The difference between Ohio State and pretty much everybody else's defense this year, Ohio State retained their recruits. That was the difference this year, Greg. That was a defense that was recruited, homegrown, developed, and they paid to keep them together. They brought in a couple players. Caleb Downs obviously was a big pickup at the safety position. But outside of that front 4, they recruited them and they paid to keep them home. And that's one of the discussion points right now is in kind of what Nick Saban's whining about. You got one team paying $30 million. You got another team paying $3 million. That's the direction. If you're going to recruit the best players and develop them, you got to keep them for more than 1 or 2 years. So you don't have another team saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to pay you more this year. Because that's the balance you got to find. It's okay to say, yeah, you got to recruit. Absolutely. But today, if you can't retain them, doesn't matter how well you recruit. Oregon's recruiting like the best. They're winning that mythical recruiting championship every year now. They haven't won anything yet. Are they going to be able to retain all these $1 million players that they're recruiting? They're already leaving. You have some guys that are holding out, not even playing in a playoff game. So my takeaway was Ohio State, they put it all together. They had an offensive coordinator who's really good, and that was his sole function. Ohio State said, you know what? Ryan Day, you've had a chance to be an offensive-minded head coach. Let's take a little bit off your plate. They spent however much money to Chip Kelly to say, go put your brain to work. They invested money back into their defense, kept that team together. And at the same time, they're recruiting behind the scenes for that next group of players. Yes, Ohio State finally got their Michigan season, so to speak. I mean, Jim Harbaugh, it took years to make it happen. Ryan Day finally, and Ohio State finally got that taste last year.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that now with the 12 team playoff, I don't doubt that the best team in college football won, but I don't know that the most deserving team won in this respect. It used to be that the regular season mattered in college football and you couldn't throw away 2 games. Ohio State threw away 2 games this year and they're still in the playoff and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think this system is designed to give us the best team, and if you go through that gauntlet they had to run, then you're the best team. I don't have a problem with that. But it does change the college football regular season pretty dramatically, where you can absolutely choke away a second loss to an inferior Michigan team, right, in the last game of the year and still win the title. That used to not be true. You could get away with 1 loss sometimes, but you couldn't get away with 2, and you certainly couldn't get away with a loss to an unranked team in your last game where you just fell apart. So that's different, and I guess that's what we have now. What's not different is that defense still wins championships. 6 of the top 10 teams in total defense were in the playoff. 7 of the top 10 teams in yards per play were in the playoff, including 1, 2, 3, all 4 of the semifinalists were in the top 7 in yards per play given up. If you want to compete, you have to be able to stop people. And stopping people doesn't mean you're going to hold them to 14 points these days, right? Nick Saban already talked about that. He cared about defense till the end, but he also said it used to be that a good defense was going to stop a good offense. Not necessarily now, but a good defense will get you some stops and they will get you some big plays. And if you hold a team in this day and age to 23 points, you're probably going to win. But in order to hold good teams to 23 points, you have to be really good up front. And most of those teams are very good up front. The other thing that occurs to me is that Notre Dame, I don't think, was close to the second most talented team in the country this year. I think they're pretty solid on both lines. I think their backs are really good. But outside of that, they man for man, they weren't close to Ohio State. They're not close to Oregon. But they played good defense. They played fundamentally sound. They got some breaks over the course of the season, including their schedule. But they won games because they played fundamentally sound defense and they made some plays when you had to make plays. And Marcus Freeman did a really good job coaching that team this year. And I thought he was probably a bad hire when they hired him. Young guy, not very much experience. I don't know. That's a pretty good coaching job this year, especially coming back from one of the most humiliating losses in Notre Dame history, losing to NIU at home early in the season. I mean, that was an impressive job. That was an impressive job.
Their problem last night is they couldn't get off the field on third down. I mean, and that was kind of the balance where Chip Kelly had the right play dialed up, regardless of the third down situation.
Well, it's easier to dial up the right play when you have those 2 backs and those 2 receivers. And right, I mean that's a freakishly talented team. And the reason Ohio State fans were screaming and yelling about Ryan Day is because they couldn't figure out why is it when we have this much talent, we have 2 losses and we almost lost to Nebraska and could barely score. We had other close calls. And the answer to that is, I don't know, but there's not a lot of good reason for it. I mean, that team was way too talented to play as poorly as they did through most of the regular season.
Well, it's why USC was able to be so competitive with Notre Dame this year. They had enough talent on offense that, strikes enough fear in that Notre Dame's got a really good defense this year. And we saw them make the plays when they had to.
Yeah.
But Ohio State just had that extra oomph. I mean, they use their running backs the way we wish Lincoln Riley uses running backs. They use their tight end. They use their wide receivers. They use the.
In fairness, Lincoln Riley probably wishes he had those running backs too.
Of course.
I mean, those guys are really good.
Sure,
and
sure,
those
sure.
receivers are really good. Their number 2 receiver is the number 1 receiver on some NFL teams in a couple of years.
But yesterday, it was the quarterback play that made the difference that you were talking about. Running, how many times they ran the ball?
Both teams, yeah. Both teams had a lot of success with that.
I do think that what we saw in the playoff is that having 12 teams, and I think this would be true of 8 teams, which, Chris, I think you and I have said 8 kind of from the beginning on this would be a better number, but 12, I think you are going to get the most deserving team at the end of it because college football is so different in the schedule, right? Oregon had they played 1 game this year. They got Ohio State at home and beat them. And that was their path. And so I think if you do that, same Indiana, right? SMU, Arizona State, like in college football, we've decided you play the schedule that you're given. I think if you win enough games on that schedule, you go in and then we find out. And it got sorted out the exact same way, right? When a 6 seed wins the NFL championship, nobody goes, well, they didn't really, they shouldn't have been in there. Like, that's not it. No, you get to the playoff and then you see who's who in the playoff. And I think that's what we saw. And you had kind of 2 different ways. Ohio State had stars all over the place, a couple big time blowouts. And Notre Dame was a team that just played like a team made the plays they had to play. It wasn't no, I don't think anybody went into Notre Dame going, "Oh God, we got these guys. This is terrifying." I mean, even USC didn't go in against them like that. But that's a way you can win. You can grind and you can churn and you can be solid in all aspects of it. That punch out force fumble is that's what a great team does. I mean, a great team makes that play. Notre Dame made that play. So I do think that it gives you a couple different routes to get where you want to go. And I think we're gonna get the best team every year at the end of this thing because it's different to win those games. I mean, you look at who Ohio State had to beat, like Tennessee, Oregon, Texas, and then Notre Dame to win a national championship. That's wild. That's
They
wild
were,
to do that. Like you are not fluking your way into that. And so I think there was so much time. Is this terrible for it? Does it invalidate the regular season? I don't think it does. You played a good enough regular season to get in there. And that's the idea. You got to get in. And then we're finding out the best team of that group. Um, I think we did that. I think we did that.
I agree. It's how it ends. If you look at basketball, the teams playing tournaments, they play good teams along the way. When the NCAA tournament starts, March Madness, nobody cares really about who beat whom unless they're matched up against each other in the tournament. And my feeling is look, none of us disagree that Ohio State wasn't the best team in the country. Notre Dame, I think, illustrated how important just a team playing as a team can go. Okay, so they didn't have superstar, maybe like Ohio State did, but they played as a team, and they should be respected for it. And the fact that they didn't, get and win the championship was no shock. I mean, it would have been a shock, especially to Ryan Day, the head coach at Ohio State, if they would have blown that one to Notre Dame. But in the end, it's the way it should have ended.
yeah, Notre Dame also shows that it pays to schedule your way into the playoff. There's a team that
It
played
certainly helps, doesn't
three
it?
true road games, one of them at Purdue. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. That Notre Dame schedule this year was embarrassing, but there is no punishment from the people who select the play. If you're gonna have SMU in there, despite not winning their conference and despite having played nobody, then that just goes to show the only thing that matters is what the second number is in your record. And if that's the case, don't play anybody.
If
That's the truth. Don't play anybody.
let's see if that holds true going forward. And look, we know that the SEC didn't really hold up their end of the bargain, but there was a lot of talk at the end of the year about the teams that got in. Should they have been in?
Well, the SEC is going to launch their stuff every year. There's no combating that. Whatever happens next year, if it's 100,
are they going to start looking at strength of schedule now going forward? Is my only question.
no,
Well, the SEC
no, they
teams
won't.
aren't. The SEC teams aren't going to play anybody preseason for the most part. But really, for as long as college football has been around, the pollsters don't really pay attention to anything except the number of losses you have. Now, if the teams have the same number of losses, then they'll look at strength of schedule. But that's always tiebreaker for them, and it still is. Notre Dame played an awful schedule. Oregon played an awful schedule. Now, Oregon is going to be in the playoff even if they played a good schedule because they were that good. But if you look at this, and if you, like me, are one of those people fighting against this idea that USC should go out, they should drop Notre Dame and go out and play just a bunch of cupcakes in their non-conference schedule, your argument is getting harder and harder to make. It's getting harder to make.
I still think if it comes to the end of next year and the SEC's position has to be 180 degrees, they'll make that too. They'll make it just like this last year never happened. We got all these wins. It doesn't matter. Don't look at who we played. We all have 11 wins. We should all be in, right? I mean,
it just means more. It just means more. But yeah. I'm with you on that. But you're actually getting to the point where if the SEC and the Big Ten decided to, they could use their weight to muscle to muscle their way into a very different scenario. The truth is, there's no reason that you should have multiple ACC or Big 12 teams in the playoff. And there's no reason you should have Boise staying in at all. There's no reason. They had no business being there. They weren't one of the 12 best teams. They couldn't possibly run the table. It makes no sense. But we'll see. I guess we got bigger things to worry about in college football than whether or not you let Boise State into the playoff. I mean, for all I know, I was surprised Genty didn't immediately transfer to Oregon and start at running back the week after Boise lost. I kind of half expected that. Okay, guys, let's close with this. Let's and maybe we'll just go one player each. We'll have time to talk more about this in the weeks before spring ball. But give me one defensive player that you're looking forward to seeing in spring ball, or seeing stretch in spring ball and hearing about in spring ball, and tell me why. Greg, why don't you start? What defensive player are you looking forward to?
Well, I look at the younger players, but I will say this: I'm waiting for Eric Gentry to live up to everything. I know he's been injured, but how does he fit in with a new linebacker coach? And is he going to really be an NFL linebacker at some point? We'll have to wait and see.
Eric Gentry, I'm looking forward to see. I want to see Eric Gentry play 12 regular season games. I don't know if we're going to see that, but if we see Eric Gentry play 12 regular season games, we're going to see a lot of plays out of that kid. Mark Holkin, who are you looking forward to seeing?
Yeah, I'm looking at one of the new incoming young men, Floyd Boucard. Again, I watched him talking to Sam Green after one of the games this past season, and I could not believe I was looking at a high school senior. He's a man. And now he's already out there doing the winter conditioning drills with the team. Benny Wiley's got his hands on him. I know the obvious answer that one of you two is going to pick is going to be Thanos, but I think Floyd Boucard, you're looking for that depth in the middle for somebody who can come in, has that athleticism, the size that can just, help bend the opponent's offensive line in the middle back a little bit. Yeah, let's see what kind of depth Eric Henderson and Sean Nua have been recruiting, and how well they can develop them and how soon they can be ready to play this year.
Eric, who's your guy?
Well, I thought all the transfer portal guys would be hit at this point, so I had taken them out. But it's the most intriguing guys are the transfer portal additions, because those guys are all brought in to start and play massive minutes on the defensive side this year. But because I'd taken those out, and because everyone else so far has gone with guys who signed with USC as high school ones, I'll go there too. Desmond Stevens at middle linebacker for me. Is he the guy? Is he the guy? I thought he would play once he started playing against Penn State. Thought we'd see more of him as the season went along. Got enough snaps to where certainly not a wasted year, but not enough to where you're saying, yeah, obviously he was ready to go from everything we saw, and he got a ton of time in the middle there. There hasn't been a clear linebacker addition in the portal that would go over the top of him. So right now he looks like the guy, and can he be the guy to run the defense for USC?
I'm not going to go with Jakeem Stewart, just like everybody else showed self-restraint too. Obviously, everybody here wants to see what he looks like because he's such an extraordinary specimen and he comes with such hype. But I'm going to go with another freshman defensive lineman. I like the Floyd Boucard pick because I'm excited about him. That's a big athletic kid. Gus Cordova from the defensive lineman from Texas. He may be the third most. He may be the guy with the third most hype of these defensive line recruits, but that kid's a really good football player who dominated in the playoffs out here.
You get one more pick because I don't know if Gus is an early enrollee.
Oh, well, Gus, get your act together. Let's call him up. And okay, well, how about this then? I want to see all three of the defensive tackles from last year. We saw Basiri a fair amount, right? He got some time, not a ton. But you're talking about three big dudes who I think could do some things. And this brings up my favorite topic of the offseason. USC's defensive line next year is going to be different than what we've been watching over the last few years. I think they're finally in a point where they have a lot of big athletic bodies and guys who can play. And Anthony Lucas coming back is going to be huge. He had not developed as a dominant pass rusher before he got hurt, but he was developed as a dominant run stuffer before he left. And I think he has the skills to be a dominant pass rusher. Um, there are a lot of good players on that defensive line. I think they're coached well. And the one thing that gives me hope next year is the most important thing a defense can have is solid guys up front that are hard to block. I don't care how good your corners are. They're not covering a guy like Ohio State's freshman wide receiver. They're not. If the quarterback has time, he's going to beat them. But if you're good up front, I don't care how good your linebackers are. If offensive linemen are immediately getting to the second level and getting in your way, you're going to struggle to stop the run. USC's defensive line this year is going to be good. I'm not saying I'm not saying Udeze, Patterson, Sean Cody good. I'm not crazy, but they're going to be good. And because they're going to be good, that defense is going to be significantly better than what we've seen from the Trojans in the past. And so I want to see all of those guys in the spring and how they develop. And I'm actually quite excited about it. Greg's skeptical. I can tell he's looking at me. He's skeptical those guys are going to be good. I'm telling you, Greg, the defensive linemen are going to play this year.
Chris, there's one thing I can count on you.
Yeah.
Hyping the defensive line, saying how impressed you are at the size.
Yeah.
And, more power to your point of view, but they got to do it. I've heard enough talk about, look, we just got to transfer from Alabama. We just got to transfer from here. All these guys sound good. They got to prove it in the spring. That's what's going to make spring ball very important.
That's why I'm excited to see them, Greg.
Well, Mark,
Greg
that's
just wants me to stop talking. Greg
that's
wants me to
definitely a
keep the show
Mark
and not
Tolkien
talk.
popcorn remark. Pass the Coca-Cola, please. Get us out of here, would you, Arledge?
I don't know what Greg thinks we're supposed to be doing on this talk show other than talk. Greg, I'm going to talk. That's all I know how to do. I'm literally paid to talk. That's my job. Okay. Well, listen, thank you everybody for joining us this week. College football season is over. NFL playoffs are going on. That's nice. But until next week, fight on, everybody.